A powerful businessman takes two young strangers in during a storm, only to discover a family secret that will change their lives forever. But when the truth comes to light, he must sacrifice everything to protect them, facing a betrayal that no one expected. The rain was falling hard that night, turning the streets into shiny mirrors that reflected the flickering lights of the city. Jonas Montenegro drove in silence, the rhythmic sound of the windshield wipers filling the emptiness of his thoughts. He had come from a grueling business event, his mind still occupied with the day's endless figures and negotiations. Just as he turned a less traveled corner, he spotted two figures walking slowly through the storm, soaked, their clothes sticking to their skin. Slowing down, Jonas squinted to get a better look. They were two young people, a woman and a boy, probably siblings. The woman was holding a worn backpack tightly, while the boy could barely stand upright. Something about her expression disturbed him. The firmness in the woman's gaze contrasted with the fragility of the boy who clearly needed help. Jonas rolled down the car window, letting the rain and cold wind in. "Do you need help?" he asked, trying to make his voice sound friendly. The woman in her 20s looked at him suspiciously. She took a step back, placing herself between the man and the boy. "We're fine," he replied curtly, but his voice betrayed his tiredness. "They don't seem to be," Jonas insisted, looking at the boy whose face was pale. "At least let me get them somewhere dry." She hesitated, but a soft moan from her brother seemed to break her resistance. Finally, she nodded slightly. Jonas got out of the car and helped the boy into the back seat, while the woman followed cautiously behind. "I'm Jonas Montenegro," he said, trying to break the awkward silence as he resumed walking. "Sophia," she answered without adding anything else. "Pedro," the boy murmured, almost in a whisper. The rest of the journey was silent, save for the constant pattering of the rain against the car. Jonas noticed Sophia's furtive glances, watching every movement as if looking for any sign of danger. He, for his part, tried to maintain a casual conversation, but without much success. When they arrived at the Montenegro mansion, Sophia was impressed, although she tried not to show it. The huge house, lit from within, seemed like a cozy shelter in the middle of the storm. Pedro, however, could barely stand, and Jonas hurried to guide him inside. Translated from Spanish to English. online.doctranslator.com. "You can stay here tonight," Jonas said, gesturing toward the large living room with a roaring fireplace. "There are plenty of rooms, and I wouldn't feel right leaving you out in the cold in this weather." "Why are you doing this?" Sophia suddenly asked, her tone full of suspicion. Jonas looked at her, surprised by her frankness. "Let's just say I don't like ignoring people who need help." Although his answer didn't seem to convince her at all, Sophia nodded cautiously. While Pedro fell asleep on the couch, she continued to watch Jonas, trying to decipher the man's true intentions. However, Jonas couldn't shake off the strange feeling that was creeping over him. There was something about the brothers that stirred in him, a mixture of curiosity and an inexplicable feeling of familiarity. The next morning arrived with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and the murmur of a light drizzle against the mansion's windows. Sophia woke with a start, her body still tense, as if she expected some imminent danger. She found Pedro fast asleep in one of the guest rooms, wrapped in warm blankets. For the first time in weeks, his face seemed at peace. Jonas was in the kitchen preparing breakfast. His relaxed appearance did not match the thoughts that had been going through his mind since the night before. As he stirred his coffee, he remembered the moment he saw the brothers in the rain. Something in their faces had stirred a forgotten corner of his memory, a corner he preferred not to explore. Sophia appeared in the doorway, her arms crossed. Although her posture was defensive, she couldn't help but notice the warmth of the space. Walls adorned with landscape paintings, shelves filled with books, and furniture that spoke of a comfortable life full of memories. "I hope you slept well," Jonas said, offering her a cup of coffee. "I don't usually accept things from strangers," she replied, taking the cup with suspicion. "Then I hope this is an exception." The silence between them was brief but tense. Jonas tried to break it with a conciliatory smile, but Sophia looked away, as if she feared something deeper. Meanwhile, Pedro woke up and, although still weak, seemed encouraged by the cozy atmosphere. Jonas showed him around the mansion, leading him through the halls and corridors. It was at one of those moments that he stopped in front of a shelf full of framed photographs. among the images of corporate events and family gatherings. One photo caught Jonas's eye. His wife Clara, who had passed away years ago, was smiling broadly, holding a little girl with dark hair and piercing eyes. Jonas felt a lump in his throat. That girl looked so much like Sophia. The resemblance was so striking that a shiver ran through his body. "Is this your family?" Pedro asked curiously, pointing at the photo. Jonas nodded slowly, not taking his eyes off the image. "Yes, it's Clara, my wife." Pedro didn't say anything more, but Jonas knew that the photograph had rekindled memories that he had buried along with the pain of loss. Later, as the brothers settled into the mansion, Jonas took the photo and looked at it closely. The possibility of a connection to Sophia was disturbing, almost impossible, but the resemblance was undeniable. Suspicion began to sprout in his mind. He decided not to say anything for the moment. He needed answers before involving the brothers. Deep down, though, he felt like the pieces of a forgotten puzzle were beginning to come together. The atmosphere in the Montenegro mansion had changed. Although the brothers tried to adapt to their new reality, the tension was palpable, especially between Jonas and Sophia. She kept looking at him suspiciously, while Jonas, restless, struggled to contain the questions that were piling up in his mind. One afternoon, while the brothers were in the garden, Jonas made an important call from his office. "I need you to look into a woman named Sophia. I don't have many details, but she must be in her mid-20s and likely grew up in difficult circumstances. Also check for any ties she may have to my wife Clara." He paused, his voice lower. "This is confidential." The recipient of his call was a trusted private investigator, someone who had already helped him in the past. Jonas knew he was taking a risk by moving pieces in the shadows, but his intuition told him there was something more behind the brothers. Meanwhile, Sophia was beginning to sense that something was not right. Although Jonas tried hard to be friendly, there were times when his gaze seemed lost, as if he were evaluating her or searching for something in her face. She couldn't ignore the feeling that he was hiding something, and it kept her on constant alert. "This place is too good to be true," she said to Pedro as they walked among the rose bushes in the garden. "Maybe he's just kind," Pedro replied, shrugging. "He helped us when no one else would." Sophia sighed, trying to remain calm. "I don't want us to get used to this, Pedro. Good things always have a price." That night, as Jonas sifted through paperwork in his study, he couldn't help but look again at the photo of Clara with a little girl who looked like Sophia. The image seemed to come to life in his mind, bringing with it fragments of memories he thought buried. The possibility that Sophia might be connected to Clara tormented him, but he needed proof before jumping to conclusions. A few days later, the researcher called him with a first breakthrough. "Mr. Montenegro, I found something interesting. According to records, Sophia and Pedro grew up in several foster homes. Their mother passed away when they were young, and there is no trace of their father. However, I am tracking down a document that might shed more light on their past." Jonas was grateful for the information, though the revelation that the siblings had lived through a difficult childhood only increased his unease. He decided that the best thing to do was to gain Sophia's trust, but his attempts were in vain. Every kind gesture seemed to fuel her distrust even further. "Why do you insist so much on helping us?" Sophia asked him directly one night while Pedro was sleeping. Jonas took a moment to respond, choosing his words carefully. "Maybe because I see something in you that reminds me of myself." Although his answer was sincere, Sophia was not satisfied. Jonas knew that time was of the essence. If his suspicions were true, he would soon have to face a truth that could change everything. The storm of doubts in Jonas's mind intensified with each passing day. Despite his efforts to remain calm, the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together in a way that terrified him. Every time he looked at Sophia, he couldn't help but think of the girl in the photo, that image that haunted him with its disturbing resemblance to Clara. But he still didn't have certainty, only fragments of a story he needed to complete. One afternoon, while Sophia and Pedro were walking around the mansion, Jonas came across Clara's photo again. This time, he looked at it more closely, looking for any detail that might confirm his fears. It was at that moment that a sound interrupted his thoughts. The phone in his office. He was the researcher. "Mr. Montenegro, we have news. We have found a direct connection between Sophia and Clara. Apparently, Clara had a daughter before she met you, although she never mentioned this fact. According to the records, Sophia was adopted by a family after the death of her biological mother, but there is evidence that Clara was involved in her life before her death. Jonas's heart skipped a beat. If everything the investigator said was true, then Sophia was not a stranger. She was his biological daughter, a secret hidden for years. The anguish and disbelief gripped him as he hung up the phone. The revelation took his breath away, and for the first time in a long time, he felt completely disoriented. The news began to open old wounds that he thought were closed. He remembered the long nights when Clara cried in silence, her internal struggles to hide a truth that she could never share with him. The loss of his wife, added to the pain of the revelation of his paternity, was tearing him apart inside. That same evening, as Sophia dined at the mansion, Jonas couldn't help but look at her in a different way. The resemblance was undeniable, and the fact that she was there, under his roof, made him feel at a crossroads. Sophia, noticing the intensity of his gaze, faced him. "What's wrong, Jonas?" she asked, her eyes reflecting a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. Jonas took a deep breath before speaking. "I have to tell you something that will change everything you know about your past." Sophia frowned, clearly confused and alert. "What do you mean?" Jonas took a deep breath. He knew he couldn't keep the truth hidden any longer, but the words wouldn't come easily. The fear of losing her, of seeing her walk away, tormented him, but the truth had to come out. "Sophia, you are my daughter." The room was filled with absolute silence. Sophia looked at him, incredulous, as if his words could not penetrate her mind. The impact was such that her lips trembled, but she said nothing. The silence that followed Jonas's confession was so thick that it seemed to fill every corner of the mansion. Sophia stared at him in disbelief, as if trying to figure out if this was a cruel joke or a truth too hard to accept. What did you say?" he finally stammered, his voice breaking. Jonas, sitting across from her, rested his hands on the table, his interlaced fingers trembling slightly. "Sophia, you are my biological daughter," he repeated, his voice filled with suppressed pain. Sophia stood up abruptly, walking away a couple of steps. Her mind was spinning like a whirlwind. All her life, she had believed that she had no family other than Pedro, and now this man, practically a stranger, was claiming to be her father. This doesn't make sense. My mother died when I was a child. My father was never in my life. How can it be you?" Her tone was a mix of anger and confusion. Jonas took a deep breath. "Clara, my wife, was your biological mother. Before we met, she had a relationship that resulted in your birth." He paused, the weight of the words falling on both of them. "I didn't know about you until now, but here you are and the proof is irrefutable." Sophia felt tears begin to well up in her eyes, but she held them back. She didn't want to show herself vulnerable in front of Jonas, someone she didn't fully trust yet. "Proof?" he demanded, his tone harsh. Jonas stood up and walked to his desk. He returned with a photograph of Clara holding a little girl, the same one that had haunted his thoughts since the day he found them in the rain. "This photo is of Clara with you. It's you, Sophia." Sophia took the picture with trembling hands. Her memories of her mother were vague, fragmented by the years and the pain of her loss. But seeing that photo awakened something inside her. The little girl in Clara's arms was unmistakably her. "Why didn't you ever look for me?" he finally asked in a small voice. Jonas felt a lump in his throat. I didn't know you existed. Clara, she never told me about you. I think she was trying to protect us both, but now I realize that was a mistake." At that moment, Pedro entered the room, interrupting the conversation. He looked at Sophia, then at Jonas, and frowned as he noticed the tension in the air. "What's going on?" Sophia pressed her lips together and did not reply. Jonas, for his part, tried to find the right words. "Pedro, I need to talk to you too. This affects us all." Pedro looked at his sister for answers, but she just shook her head, as if she couldn't explain what she had just discovered. "I need time," Sophia finally said, walking away from the place with hurried steps. Jonas watched her disappear down the hall, feeling the weight of a guilt he didn't know he could redeem. Now more than ever, he had to find a way to show them that he wasn't there to abandon them, but to build something new. Night fell heavily on the Montenegro mansion. Silence reigned, interrupted only by the occasional creaking of wood and the distant sound of the wind through the trees. Jonas remained in his office, a glass of whiskey in his hand, his gaze lost in the photograph of Clara. The weight of the confession had left him exhausted, but he knew it was only the beginning. Sophia was in her room, sitting by the window. The fine rain was hitting the glass, reflecting the internal storm that raged inside her. Her mind relived Jonas's words over and over again. "You are my daughter." Every time she thought about it, a mixture of anger, confusion, and sadness invaded her. Pedro approached her cautiously, leaving a cup of tea on the table. "Are you going to tell me what's going on?" he asked in a soft but firm tone. Sophia turned to him, her eyes filled with tears that refused to fall. "Jonas says he is our father." Pedro blinked, surprised. "What? That doesn't make sense." "I know," Sophia replied, clenching her fists. "But she has proof, Pedro. There's a photo of Mom with me, and her story fits." Pedro remained silent, processing the information. Although his nature was calmer, the weight of the revelation affected him as well. After a few seconds, he placed a hand on his sister's shoulder. "And what are we going to do now?" Sophia sighed, looking out the window again. "I don't know, but I don't trust him. All this, it's too much." The next morning, Jonas decided to confront the brothers again. He found them in the main hall, where the atmosphere was tense and charged. Peter eyed him warily, while Sophia maintained a cold expression. "I know this is hard to accept," Jonas began, his tone calm. "But everything I told you is true. I'm not here to impose myself on your lives, but I do believe that you deserve to know the truth." Sophia interrupted him in a sharp tone. "The truth? Where has that truth been all these years? If you really are my father, why have you never shown up before?" Jonas felt the impact of her words but remained calm. "I never knew about you, Sophia. Clara didn't tell me anything about your existence. If I had known, I would have done everything possible to find you." Pedro, although calmer, spoke sincerely. "This doesn't change what we've been through. All we have is each other, and I don't know if I'm ready to accept someone else being a part of that." Jonas nodded, understanding their resistance. "I don't expect you to accept me right away, or even trust me now, but I want to show you that my intention is not to replace anything, but to build something new." Sophia stood up, her hard gaze fixed on Jonas. "That will be very difficult to achieve." He walked out of the room, leaving Jonas and Peter in an awkward silence. Jonas knew that words wouldn't be enough. If he wanted the brothers to accept him, he would have to earn their trust with actions, not promises. For her part, Sophia stepped out into the garden, letting the fresh air try to calm her. Although she wanted to reject Jonas completely, a small part of her couldn't ignore the emptiness she had always felt from not having a father. Maybe, just maybe, there was some truth to her intentions. The following days passed in a fragile balance at the Montenegro mansion. Jonas tried to get closer to the brothers with simple gestures, such as sharing stories from his life with Clara or leaving spaces for them to express themselves. However, Sophia remained distant, protecting Pedro and herself from what she considered an attempt at emotional manipulation. But while Jonas was dealing with family tension, an external problem was beginning to brew beyond his control. In the business world, his name was synonymous with power and influence, but also with rivalries. One of his main enemies, Gabriel Montero, had been closely watching Jonas's every move. Montero was a calculating and vengeful man who had lost important contracts to Jonas's company. When he learned that Jonas had welcomed two young strangers into his mansion, he began to investigate. Through his contacts, he discovered the first hints of a possible scandalous connection between the brothers and Jonas's past. One afternoon, while Jonas was reviewing documents in his office, he received an unexpected call. "Montenegro, it's been a long time since we last spoke," Montero said in a sarcastic tone. Jonas frowned, immediately recognizing his rival's voice. "What do you want, Montero?" "I want to do you a favor, Jonas. I hear you have some new guests. Pretty secrets, aren't they?" There was a calculated pause before he continued. "What will the press think if they find out you have an illegitimate daughter you never acknowledged?" Jonas felt a knot in his stomach. Don't you dare! Oh, I'm not the one to do it. Just imagine how your partners, the media, and your entire power circle would react when this story comes to light. It could destroy everything you built, but I'm willing to keep quiet for a price. Jonas gritted his teeth, furious. How much do you want? Montero let out a dry laugh. It's not money I want, Jonas. I want your company out of the next project you're working on. If you walk away from that contract, I promise not to say anything. The call ended abruptly, leaving Jonas feeling like the ground was falling out from under his feet. Montero's threat not only endangered his reputation, but also the fragile relationship he was trying to build with Sofia and Pedro. That night, as the brothers ate dinner in silence, Jonas couldn't help but look at them with a mix of worry and guilt. He knew that protecting them would be his priority, but doing so could cost him everything he had worked for over the years. He decided not to tell them anything for the moment. He needed time to plan his next move and find a way to neutralize Montero without destroying what little he had managed to recover with the brothers. However, the feeling that time was running out was undeniable. The tension in the Montenegro mansion was palpable. Although Sofia and Pedro tried to maintain a routine, they both noticed that Jonas was more distant, absorbed in his thoughts. His expression reflected a mix of worry and exhaustion that was impossible to ignore. While the brothers continued to deal with their own emotions regarding the recent revelations, Jonas faced a decision that could change their lives forever. Gabriel Montero's ultimatum tormented him. Renouncing the contract meant a devastating blow to his company, but protecting Sofia and Pedro was now his priority. That morning, in his office, Jonas was once again reviewing the documents related to the project while the echo of Montero's words resonated in his mind. Finally, he made a decision. Hours later, he summoned Sofia and Pedro to the main hall. The siblings arrived with cautious expressions, especially Sofia, who continued to maintain an emotional barrier between herself and Jonas. I have something I need to share with you, Jonas began, his tone solemn. He cleared his throat before continuing. Ever since you got here, I've been trying to figure out how best to handle the situation, but there's something I can't ignore. Sofia frowned, crossing her arms. Now what? Jonas took a deep breath, searching for the right words. An old rival of mine has discovered our connection and is threatening to make it public. He wants to destroy my reputation using this story, and I won't let that happen. Peter opened his eyes, alarmed. What does that mean? It means I'm going to face this situation head-on. I'll give up the contract that Montero is demanding, and I'll be prepared for whatever comes next. The room was filled with a tense silence. Sofia stared at him, trying to decipher if his words were sincere. And what do you expect from us? He asked coldly. Jonas shook his head. Nothing. I don't expect anything from you. I just want you to know that I'm not going to use this situation for my benefit or hide it. I'd rather lose everything than let this harm you. Pedro, though still confused, nodded slowly. That's, very risky, Jonas. I know, Jonas replied, looking directly at Sofia. But it's the right thing to do. Sofia, though still skeptical, felt a pang of something she hadn't expected. Respect. Despite her resistance, she couldn't ignore that Jonas was willing to sacrifice everything to protect them. That evening, Jonas released a statement through his PR team. In it, he admitted Sofia's existence as his biological daughter and explained the circumstances of their reunion. Although a scandal was guaranteed, Jonas decided to take control of the narrative before Montero could exploit the situation. When the statement was released, the repercussions were not long in coming. The media was filled with speculation, and business partners began to express their concerns. Jonas, however, remained steadfast, determined to face the consequences of his decisions. At the mansion, Sofia read the announcement on her phone with a mixture of shock and bewilderment. For the first time, she began to wonder if Jonas was being sincere in his intention to protect them. The scandal erupted like a storm in the media. The headlines were filled with words like secret daughter and hidden family, while Jonas's partners, one after another, began to distance themselves. However, Jonas Montenegro, with the weight of his decision on his shoulders, did not show a hint of regret. Sofia watched everything from a distance. Although she still doubted Jonas's intentions, she could not ignore what he had done. He had risked his reputation, his fortune, and everything he had built for a truth that she herself was not yet ready to accept. One afternoon, while Peter was playing with a dog that one of the mansion's employees had brought in, Sophia found Jonas in the garden. He was leaning over a table, going through some papers, but his expression seemed calmer, as if he had found some sort of peace within the chaos. "Was all this worth it?" Sophia asked, breaking the silence. Jonas looked up at her. "You tell me, Sophia." She frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means that I don't care what the media, partners, or even the whole world say. The only thing that matters to me now is that you and Pedro are okay. If that means losing everything else, then yes, it was worth it." Sophia didn't respond immediately. Jonas's words echoed in her mind, challenging her own emotional barriers. In the days that followed, Jonas began to work on something that, in the eyes of many, seemed crazy. Using the resources he still had at his disposal, he founded an organization dedicated to supporting vulnerable children, especially those who, like Sophia and Pedro, had been in foster care and had a childhood marked by abandonment. Sophia, though skeptical at first, began to notice the sincerity behind his actions. Jonas was not only donating money to the cause, he was also dedicating time, visiting centers, listening to stories, and showing genuine commitment. He even involved Pedro, who was enthusiastic about helping with activities for the children. One day, as Sophia watched Peter interact with a group of children, she felt an emotion she couldn't immediately identify. There was something inspiring about what Jonas was doing, something that seemed to speak directly to a part of her she had kept hidden for years. That night, she decided to confront him again. She found him in his office, working on the details of an upcoming charity event. "What you're doing is..." "Well," Sophia said hesitantly. Jonas looked up, surprised by her less defensive tone. "I don't expect that to change how you feel about me, but thank you." Sophia looked at him, studying every expression on his face. "I'm not ready to call you father, Jonas, but I'm starting to think that maybe you're not the man I thought you were." Jonas nodded, not pressing her. "That's more than I could have hoped for." For the first time, a slight understanding seemed to emerge between them. Although the road to reconciliation was far from over, they both knew they had taken the first step towards something that could change their lives forever. The sun shone brightly in the following morning as it was reflected in the calm that finally began to settle in the Montenegro mansion. Jonas was in the garden, watching the movement as preparations for the charity event took shape. Despite two recent challenges, he felt that something inside him had changed. A new determination, a greater purpose than any business or contract that had been lost. Sophia and Pedro were also there. They still have a certain distance. Pedro, always more curious, asked Jonas about the organization and the children who would benefit. Sophia, on the other hand, remained silent, but her constant presence was a sign that something inside her was transforming. The event brought together people from various parts of the city, including newspaper workers, sponsors, and even some influential figures who still trusted Jonas. The main attraction, however, were the stories of children helped by the organization. Jonas wanted to give voice to them, showing that, even in the midst of adversity, hope could flourish. When it's time for Jonas to make his speech, the silence takes place in the room. He went up to the box with firm steps, securing a small piece of paper, plus logo, or left it aside. "I don't want to talk like a businessman or a philanthropist," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "I want to act like someone who makes mistakes, who lost his way, and who is now trying to rebuild something more important than any fortune: ties." "We will find Jonas's eyes and Sophia's eyes in the crowd," he breathed out before continuing. "I learned in a more difficult way that the truth is always on its way. And when she breaks, we must face her with courage, even though this protects us all. Oye, I am here because I believe that it is never too late to do something, or that it is right." The audience applauded wildly when Jonas finished his speech. Sophia, however, remained motionless, feeling a wave of emotions that she did not know how to process. Jonas's honesty had touched him in an unexpected way. Later, as the lights of the event began to go out, Sophia found Jonas alone, watching the stars on the Manson terrace. She approached, her hesitant steps echoing the stone. "Was all this worth it?" Sophia asked, breaking the silence. Jonas looked up at her. You tell me, Sophia. She frowned. What does that mean? It means that I don't care what the media, partners, or even the whole world say. The only thing that matters to me now is that you and Pedro are okay. If that means losing everything else, then yes, it was worth it. Sophia didn't respond immediately. Jonas's words echoed in her mind, challenging her own emotional barriers. In the days that followed, Jonas began to work on something that, in the eyes of many, seemed crazy. Using the resources he still had at his disposal, he founded an organization dedicated to supporting vulnerable children, especially those who, like Sophia and Pedro, had been in foster care and had a childhood marked by abandonment. Sophia, though skeptical at first, began to notice the sincerity behind his actions. Jonas was not only donating money to the cause, he was also dedicating time, visiting centers, listening to stories, and showing genuine commitment. He even involved Pedro, who was enthusiastic about helping with activities for the children. One day, as Sophia watched Peter interact with a group of children, she felt an emotion she couldn't immediately identify. There was something inspiring about what Jonas was doing, something that seemed to speak directly to a part of her she had kept hidden for years. That night, she decided to confront him again. She found him in his office, working on the details of an upcoming charity event. What you're doing is… Well, Sophia said hesitantly. Jonas looked up, surprised by her less defensive tone. I don't expect that to change how you feel about me, but thank you. Sophia looked at him, studying every expression on his face. I'm not ready to call you father, Jonas, but I'm starting to think that maybe you're not the man I thought you were. Jonas nodded, not pressing her. That's more than I could have hoped for. For the first time, a slight understanding seemed to emerge between them. Although the road to reconciliation was far from over, they both knew they had taken the first step towards something that could change their lives forever. The sun shone brightly in the following morning as it was reflected in the calm that finally began to settle in the Montenegro mansion. Jonas was in the garden, watching the movement as preparations for the charity event took shape. Despite 2 recent challenges, he felt that something inside him had changed. A new determination, a greater purpose than any business or contract that had been lost. Sophia and Pedro were also there. They still have a certain distance. Pedro, always more curious, asked Jonas about the organization and the children who would benefit. Sophia, on the other hand, remained silent, but her constant presence was a sign that something inside her was transforming. The event brought together people from various parts of the city, including newspaper workers, sponsors, and even some influential figures who still trusted Jonas. The main attraction, however, were the stories of children helped by the organization. Jonas wanted to give voice to them, showing that, even in the midst of adversity, hope could flourish. When it's time for Jonas to make his speech, the silence takes place in the room. He went up to the box with firm steps, securing a small piece of paper, plus logo, or left it aside. I don't want to talk like a businessman or a philanthropist, he said, his voice filled with emotion. I want to act like someone who makes mistakes, who lost his way, and who is now trying to rebuild something more important than any fortune: ties. We will find Jonas's eyes and Sophia's eyes in the crowd. He breathed out before continuing. I learned in a more difficult way that the truth is always on its way. And when she breaks, we must face her with courage, even though this protects us all. Oye, I am here because I believe that it is never too late to do something, or that it is right. The audience applauded wildly when Jonas finished his speech. Sophia, however, remained motionless, feeling a wave of emotions that she did not know how to process. Jonas's honesty had touched him in an unexpected way. Later, as the lights of the event began to go out, Sophia found Jonas alone, watching the stars on the Manson terrace. She approached, her hesitant steps echoing the stone. Do you really lose everything for us? He asked, his voice low. Jonas turned to face her, his face reflecting a mixture of tiredness and relief. You non perdi, Sophia. I won something that money could not buy, a chance to meet them, and who knows, one day it will be oil for you. Sophia remained silent for a moment before finally speaking. Maybe my daughter is not ready to oil everything, but she is willing to try. Jonas felt the weight of his words and a small smile emerged on his lips. It was not a complete victory, but it was the beginning of something real. That night, while Pedro was jumping like a puppy in the garden and Sofia was watching next to Jonas, it seemed that, for the first time, the family was finding its balance. It was not perfect, but it was a glimpse of possibilities. The story of Jonas, Sofia, and Pedro reminds us that the truth always finds its way, even if it sometimes makes us face our greatest fears. What would you do if you had to choose between protecting those you love and sacrificing everything you've built? Sometimes the hardest decisions are the ones that teach us the true meaning of family and forgiveness. Click on the video above to continue this incredible journey of self-discovery and learn how our decisions can change the course of our lives. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories that inspire you to reflect on your own secrets and challenges. See you in the next chapter.